Hello and welcome to The Mohit Show. In this video, I'll be covering posts from r/detrans, a well-moderated subreddit for people questioning, desisting, or detransitioning. On to this video's first post, titled, Wish I Never Learned What Being Trans Was. This is by Detrans Male. I'm going to start off by saying that I don't have anything against trans people. I'm sure transition helped some of them, but it just did not for me. Sorry for any poor wording ahead. Still trying to sort out what happened still and what that means for me. I'm 24 years old and detransitioned this year after 5 years on hormones. There are of course the physical changes I still have to deal with, but honestly a lot of my regret stems from even before I started hormones or publicly started presenting as a woman. I was an incredibly insecure autistic teen with low self-esteem, and I did not like my body. I'd sometimes even hated it. Just felt disconnected from myself. Heard about trans stuff at the time and felt like it was a way out of my body, I guess. Went online and just got absorbed into trans material. Constant affirmation that I was actually a girl inside, and that's why I hated my body. So basically, in late high school, 11th and 12th grade for my fellow Americans here, being trans was my obsession. Spent most of my time online in trans spaces. I failed to form any social connection and skills that were typical for someone of my age because it felt like I couldn't do any of that until I was my true self. It drove me into a deeper depression. Instead of learning to love myself as I was convinced that my body was wrong and ugly, and I needed a new one. I wasted away half of high school on this. Prior to learning about trans stuff, I never thought about being a woman. Studied medical transition at 19 years old while at college. For a bit, things were okay. I was finally going to get the body I wanted. I achieved what every other young trans person online was craving. After a year, though, and after the euphoria came off, I still didn't have my ideal body. Obsession continued. 2 years came and went. Then 3. Then 4. Then into the 5th year. All while obsessing over it. Still stuck in varying levels of depression, and still throwing away all social aspects of my life. I failed to make any friends and wasted away a solid portion of my youth. Wasted whatever college life I was supposed to have, and any enjoyable moments that could have come from it. I think that pains me more than any aspect of the medical transition I went through. I could go into other aspects of it, but I imagine this is going to be long enough as it is. Not a day goes by where I wish I could go back to high school, extract any information about being trans from my mind, and receive better therapy. Wish I could go back and actually enjoy those college years and actually connect with others, instead of sitting in my apartment despairing. Wish I learned how to love myself and my body at the time. Still cannot believe it took me this long to realize all of this. On a positive note, I got a new job recently as well, and I'm continuing my education online. It's not a great or glamorous job, but still a job, and still something that helps me further my goals. Of course, I'm still trying to put a lot of pieces together and recovering, I guess. Trying to build an actual meaningful life. It feels weird and almost dreamlike at times, like coming out of a deep dark pit. I don't see a lot of detrans male posts on here, so I hope maybe this post gives another person something to reflect on and relate to. Hope everyone here is doing well or making good progress to being happy or at least okay. Now from the comments, someone desisted says, so many young people are going through this right now. Ask yourself why. Someone who questioned their own gender transition comments, detrans male here as well, but I'm just starting. I also wish I never knew what being trans was. I had no dysphoria that I could think of before discovering what being trans was. I do think rapid onset dysphoria is a real thing. I definitely had body image issues before I discovered the trans label, and I attributed a lot of those to dysphoria. I'm sitting on my couch right now with stubble and it doesn't bother me at all. But years ago, it would cause me massive dysphoria. It's hard not to think I reworked my brain and became obsessed with these things like you did. Obsessed with appearing as a girl. How did you find your detransition is going? Are you happier now? Do you still feel bits of dysphoria every once in a while? The original poster replies, it's hard to tell, honestly. I think I honestly just taught myself to hate my body for so long that I think that's where any lingering dysphoria comes from. However, it's not anywhere near what it was in the past. Once I realized what was really happening, it diminished a ton. Just something else with stubble. Back when I would shave so hard and get rashes on my face if I even felt a bit of facial hair, I eventually had laser hair removal on my face so I don't get a ton anymore. But any I do get, I don't care that much anymore. And someone who's questioning their own gender transition replies to that. I think I was in the same boat with my dysphoria. It's weird, but after hating my trans body for not being female enough, living in a male body that's just cisgendered is pretty ducking awesome. Even if I don't fit the masculine ideal, I'm skinny and lanky. I was in the same place with shaving. I'd always have a razor burn from shaving against the grain so it was perfectly smooth. Most of it is lasered off now, but I never liked having a beard when I could grow one, so it's fine with me. And the original poster replies to that. I mean, after almost 5 years on hormones, it's kind of difficult to be super masculine, lol. I don't really want to be anyways. I'm perfectly fine with being a more feminine appearing guy. It's not like people have any doubts that I'm a guy. The only thing that is that I still have my legal female name that I got it changed to. I use a more masculine version of it in daily use with people though. Funny enough, I don't really care to change it back. People don't think it's interesting that a guy has a more female name. People think that it's interesting that a guy has a more female name, and I don't mind. And someone who's questioning their own gender transition comments on the original post. Wasted years 8 through 12 on this. F my life. Ended up leading to me dropping out of school. Next post. Titled, How Am I Supposed to Be a Man Now? This is by Detrans Male. I was on hormones for almost 2 years and publicly trans for almost three, with another year of private exploration before that. Before I settled on transition as the solution to my problem, though, I hated being a boy. It always felt like it made me worthless. Like if I had been a girl, I would have had friends and people would like me. Being neurotypical probably would have been a more effective solution. On top of that, so many things about maleness just made me feel like an awful person. Despite my lack of friends and social skills, I had my first girlfriend at 14. Her best friend basically had to tell me to ask her out. And I loved her a lot. But over the year we dated, I realized that I hated being a boyfriend. Straight relationships felt so lopsided and unfair. I wish we could both be girlfriends. At 16, when my mustache turned into a full beard, people started acting more deferential to me, calling me things like sir and boss. It felt so awful. Why should I get that kind of treatment just because I have hair on my face and my family bought me too much J. Crew? But when it all got to be too much, I broke down in public. Happened a lot at one point in my life. Nobody ever cared. Nobody gave me a hug. No one even asked what was wrong. It felt like being a man meant getting a bunch of meaningless respect I didn't deserve and no love. It seemed like being a woman was so much more fun and emotionally healthy. So I tried it in the ways I could. And it was, especially at first. The queer community gave me a bunch of neurodivergent friends, and the way strangers treated me it felt so much warmer. It really felt like I'd solved the riddle whispered in my ear my whole life. But then I started passing, and it started changing slowly. First, I started feeling the fear that I'd heard women talk about but never really understood. It started walking alone at night in the dark streets, but eventually it made it so even being alone in my own apartment felt unsafe. The next blow was when I broke up with the girl, sorry. I was dating in my exploratory cross-dressing phase and I realized how limited my dating options as a trans girl were. I'd always felt like men were generally worse than women, but seeing that girls were way more interested in them when I was doing my best to scrub that stain off me turned my vague misandry into a deep hatred of men that I'm still dealing with. The end really began when I started injections and my breast ballooned to be larger than my sister's and my mom's. The wave of attention from men I got just amplified my hatred of them, even though I was literally bisexual and had enjoyable experiences with men pre-transition. I started to hate what my body had become too. It started to feel viscerally off, almost like I was wearing a suit and my real body was stuck inside. I tried presenting butch, but that honestly felt kind of silly and didn't make me feel any better. I realized I was experiencing something more like how other trans people describe gender dysphoria than anything I'd experienced before, so I decided to go off hormones. It's been a few months since then, and I feel a lot better now. I kept presenting femme for some time, but in fits and spurts started to try to look more masked. I feel great about how my body's changing off hormones. My breasts and hips have shrunk, and some of my facial hair has returned. But the idea of being a man socially still feels awful. At the same time, I think I'd rather just be a cis man than go back to trying to fit myself into a gender that isn't for me. I wish I could be neither, but most people will always read you one way or the other. I still hate men and hate myself for wanting to be one. I've never really had a positive male role model. My dad was very distant growing up, and I never had any teachers that I was close to. How am I supposed to accept myself as a man? I hate the idea, but it seems like my only option now. From the comments. A detrans male comments, being seen as a girl was a thrill for me. As a man, no one gave a s about me. But as a girl, people treated me super nice. I loved all the attention and validation. I felt really valued and attractive. But after a few years, in the end, it all felt empty and I felt I was lacking deeper meaning in my life. And I tried of chasing those things and tried pretending to be a girl all the time. I feel a lot healthier and at peace now that I accept I'm a man and I'm grateful for it. Put aside all of society's nonsense and realize we're simply the sex that isn't saddled with all the baby making equipment like women have. That's all. Yes, being a man is harder in many ways. Yes, we're mostly just valued for what we can do rather than for what we are. But maybe that's a good thing. Deep down, do you really want the easy way? I get a lot of fulfillment doing hard things now. I prefer now to focus on what I can do rather than how I look. It makes me a lot less self-obsessed and self-focused. I enjoy training my body now and learning new skills and being competent. There's also the advantage of being sovereign and having your own value in yourself and not being dependent on external validation. Remember, yes, you are a man, but you can be a man in whatever way you want. You don't have to impress anyone or be macho. I found my own way to be a man and that felt authentic to me and that I loved. Be grateful for what your body can do, for being healthy and strong. Let go of envy and be grateful. A desisted male comments, hi, we're struggling to a similar thing. What actually helped me a lot is understanding that for being a male, you only have to be a biological one. There's nothing other than it. Being a boy, being a man, etc. It's just having a male sex. Also, it's evident by your story you extremely admire and love women. Like when you said I hated being the boyfriend. I hope we could just be both girlfriends, which is something I struggle a lot with. I want you to reflect a minute. Why do you admire and idolize so many women? Why do you can only admire women? The original poster replies to that. The big thing for me here is that masculinity feels like a never-ending competition. Like, to make it as a woman, you just have to be good enough, but making it as a man means you have to be better than the other men. I think that's a lot of why all people I've admired have been women. Girls can be toxic sometimes, but they always had an openness to people around them that men lacked. And I feel like I usually lack too. I could try to just drop out of the rat race of masculinity, but what's left for me then? I'd rather hide behind the female disguise. And the decisive person replies to that, you can just adopt the traits you admire. You don't have to play a rat race. Just be human. I'm sure you know by now that this assessment of the female experience is out of touch with what we actually deal with, and that our life isn't easy mode / has its own issues. But you don't have to be a competitor. You can be emotionally open and kind and etc. as you are. If people assume different about you because of your sex, prove them wrong. Be kind, be gentle, be emotionally open, be friends with women, etc. You can be and do all you want just as you are, without calling yourself a woman for behaviors and stereotypes. A D-trans person comments on the original post. Positive male role model would be an incredible place to start. And then a D-trans male, which is the original poster, comments, it's a nice idea, but where do I find one? I can't remember a man I've known whom I'd like to be like. Everyone I've really admired has been a woman. It feels even more impossible to form a relationship with a male role model now, since these days, any man who seems happy or even just attractive in a masculine way fills me with rage and jealousy. A D-trans female comments on the original post. Humans are humans. It sounds like you've had some rough experiences with men. I understand, as I have too. But you don't have to be anyone but you. Show yourself you can be the type of man you wish you were around your whole life. What do you see in other men? You can be that too. Sounds like you've learned a lot about perspectives and can put that into good use. These experiences bring us to be more compassionate individuals, as hard and hurtful as they can be. You're safe to be you, and you deserve to be treated with loving kindness by all types of people. Now on to the next post. Titled, Struggling to be the woman I want to be. So this is by a D-trans female. I want to be pretty and feminine. I don't look like other women. My face looks strange and mannish. I've been off testosterone for 10-ish months now and was off and on for a little less than a year. I want to be feminine. I want to wear makeup and cute clothes. I denied myself that for so long. It's hard to see any differences. I know that when I dress up ultra femme, I look like a fraud. I was never shown anything feminine growing up. I'm still struggling to find bras that work. I don't know anything about makeup. I've trained myself to act like a stereotypical man. Other women make it seem so easy. I know it isn't. Ah, I just want to be seen as a regular woman. Now from the comments. A D-trans person comments, on and off a little less than a year? That's not the tea, baby. You're still looking in the mirror and experiencing intrusive negative thoughts about yourself. Something is going on with your perception of yourself. You can't blame on and off tea for a year. Just doesn't work like that. Therapy is helpful. And the original poster replies, I understand what you're saying, but you don't know me in real life. I'm 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered, and I only get called a woman if someone isn't looking at me because I've trained my voice to be higher. When they turn around, they switch and call me sir. I was raised as a boy, and before tea, my voice was already deep. Even before tea, I was read as male. I'm new to anything and everything tied to womanhood. Dresses don't fit because my shoulders are too broad. I need a special order shoes because I'm a size 13 in women's. I'm hairy as hell, thanks Italian genes. I also grew up playing every sport imaginable. My body looks male besides my chest. I understand that you're trying to help, but I know I was already perceived as male. But how I was already perceived as male led me down this path to begin with. I'm fine with most of my masculine traits. I just wish I could feel more feminine. Whenever I wear dress or makeup, people stare, and while shopping for dresses, I was called a pervert, and a Karen told me she'd call the cops on me. I don't know. Sorry for ranting, lol. But I just know what I look like and act like. A D-trans person replies to that, I see. Yeah, that sucks. Unfortunately, all these issues, though, are pre-T issues. We live in a society that likes to police all bodies and make assign female at births hyper-feminine and assign male at births hyper-masculine. I'm not sure there's much you can or should do to prove your womanhood. You are one already if you say you are, you know? Parents like that should be called out on their bull ass. Maybe instead of hyper-feminizing yourself, go to therapy and learn how to mentally and emotionally defend yourself during these situations. Just trying to help. And a D-trans person comments on the original post. It definitely helps to just consistently spend time with other women and pick up mannerisms naturally. Some slower than others, but the right YouTube searches and studying women is good too. People like vloggers just describing their day, their reactions, their emotions, feeding your mind that content and being in that environment. Now on to the next post, titled, I really love this group. This is from someone questioning their own gender transition. This group of people is honestly amazing because it gives me hope for myself that I can love who I am as a cis woman. I have TOCD, trans OCD, but looking at this sub gives me hope that I can learn to love myself again. I've always loved being a girl, but there was always doubt in my head ever since I developed TOCD. It really sucks and affects me deeply, but deep down, I really do just want to be a cis woman because that's who I am in reality. Now, I never wanted to be a boy, and I still don't. Anyone who wants to put their journey or advice down in the comments is more than welcome. Smiley face. From the comments, desisted female comments, glad being here has helped you. I'll give you a somewhat short overview of how it went for me. Performing gender roles is something a lot of people think is necessary, and for a long time I thought I must be doing something wrong because I couldn't get the hang of it. Combine that with a lot of sex dysphoria, wanting a dick, hating my period, having a naturally low voice for a girl, having tons of body hair, etc. It was easy for me to not believe I was truly a boy. I also had pretty deep-seated internalized misogyny and a not like other girls complex. But then I started listening to my doubts. I entertained that voice that said, you know, all this trans stuff makes no sense, instead of running away from it. I realized gender roles are not a requirement to be a woman or a man. I wasn't failing at womanhood because I couldn't get the hang of performing femininity. I couldn't get the hang of it because it was a lot of effing work and I'm too lazy to doll myself up on a regular basis. Wanting a dick didn't make me male. Having masculine coded hobbies didn't make me male. Having thick body hair and a low voice didn't make me male. I realized that thinking those things made me more of a guy and less of a girl was regressive and sexist. Nowadays, I just roll my eyes and scoff at trans people who use stereotypes and bodily discomfort to justify their transness. Because they sound like conservatives, the very group most trans people claim to despise. I'm not perfect, but I'm in a much better place now that I was in my than I was in my 20s when I was trying to escape my femaleness. And the original poster replies, do you feel good about being female now? And the detrans female replies, I have my moments where I'm resentful still, but for the most part, yes. And a desisted person replies to that. Me too, it's going to last for some time. I noticed I'm going back and forth. Or I guess in this text, back and forth. The original poster also comments, do you think you'll be a girl for the rest of your life? And do you want to be a girl? The same desisted female from before comments, I will be a female for the rest of my life, regardless of my feelings about it. Humans can't change sex. Even if I went on testosterone and got every surgery in the book, I will always be female. Saying I identify as man doesn't magically make me male. The trans community loves to tell people that womanhood and manhood are identities, that one can become a woman or a man through hormones, surgery, and performative stereotypes. That's false. Womanhood and manhood are material realities. The most masculine woman is still a woman. The most feminine man is still a man. I don't always like being female. I don't enjoy experiencing misogyny. I don't enjoy being followed by strange men. This happened recently and really made me want to transition again. I don't enjoy seeing my sex constantly used as fap fodder for straight men in every form of media. But I don't want to continue seeing my femaleness as a handicap. I don't want to continue being angry and resentful at something I can't control. I want to learn to love my femaleness and make peace with it. It's difficult, but for me, it's much easier than fighting a losing battle by trying to escape it. Now, desisted male comments on the original post. On one hand, there are people who would have you believe that you are born in the wrong body. On the other hand, there are people like us here who want you to understand that you are born perfect. I think it's quite obvious which mentality is the healthiest. Glad you're loving this group. And the detrans female comments, I'm glad you found this group. It certainly would have helped me if I'd found it when I was deep in my TOCD. Post titled, I want to acknowledge the accomplishment of detransition for whoever needs to hear it. A detrans male is making this post. I guess I kind of made this sub my home after finding it. Despite my dysphoria being more or less resolved and my gender issues long dead and buried, it's been nice to finally know of others who had had the same experiences as me, and years later to be able to finally share ideas that bounced alone in my brain or to offer support and encouragement where possible. I've always tried to strive for positive or neutral posts only, but don't always succeed in that. I don't want to present myself as the stereotypical bitter D-trans, hateful towards the trans community, because in reality I'm not. But this post isn't going to be about them at all, it's about us. It might come off as a little sycophantic, but I hope it can make someone feel much better. We all had a dream we wanted so much. It was everything to us. It permeated every aspect of our being and dictated how we went about our lives. So much more than we desire, it was so much more than a desire, it was who we were supposed to be. We went to extraordinarily lengths in the pursuit of our dream. We sacrificed our stability, our families, our time, our income, our health, our bodies. We lost a lot, but in the promise of the dream, it was worth it. It was all that mattered. Some of us made it all the way before we realized. Some of us saw the inevitable approaching from a distance. Each and every one of us eventually discovered that the dream was a false promise, unobtainable, impossible, unreal. There are many ways in which we consolidate our feelings towards our transition. Maybe you're resolute and see it as the cutting off of a tumor you hadn't realized had grown so large. Maybe you're a survivor and see it as finally walking out the door on an abusive partner. Maybe you're more mournfully sentimental and see it as the turning off the life support for a cherished loved one that couldn't be saved. However we got here and however we feel about it, we all look directly at our dream, the thing that meant everything to us, and recognize how much it was harming us and chose to walk away. We struck out alone for the first time in a long time without the dream obscuring the reality of who we were and what we could or could not be. You did that. You could have carried on pretending for much longer, battling away the doubts and burying them under a facade of success, continuing along in an echo chamber of affirmation and encouragement to mask the misery and uncertainty, fearing being too far gone to return, and carrying on out of sheer inertia. Instead, you chose to find your way back to yourself, knowing the humiliation of admitting you were wrong, knowing that everyone you respected said it shouldn't or couldn't be done, knowing that what it meant to be an apostate in your communities, knowing that you may never fully get back what you lost. What an incredible strength of will it took to do that. It doesn't give back what was lost. It doesn't make the healing any faster or the pain any smaller. But nobody ever really outwardly acknowledges how difficult of a realization and decision it is to detransition. You accomplished that. Okay, next post, titled, I hate how politicized we've become. This is by someone who's detrans. Transitioning has probably become the biggest social issue today next to abortion. With elections coming up now, it's all you hear about. Politicians pretending they actually care about us in order to push their personal agendas. I'm trying so hard to move on from my mistakes, but it's impossible when you're reminded of them every day. Hearing about it makes me depressed and full of regret. This is really gonna haunt me forever. Now, from the comments, someone who's desisted says, the trans movement slash gender ideology have been ideologically driven since it began. There seems to be a strong basis for homosexuality being biological, but any non-Western cultural transing is usually associated with prostitution as a way to survive, hide homosexuality, or escape gender roles. Hijira, Japanese traditional trans prostitutes, and T-boys and bacha bazi in Afghanistan, there isn't much biological basis for trans being an actual thing. And in the West, it's basically been in lockstep with leftist ideologies. It's not so much as the left having embraced trans, it's more like the left invented the Western idea of trans. You would be hard pressed to find a family that was conservative that was convinced that their child was trans. But there are thousands of families with a strong leftist ideological standpoint or activist lifestyle that have kids that are gender fluid, etc. I would recommend reading about Lysenkoism. It's basically the same attempt to ignore reality in benefit of defending the ideology. The link in the description. In that case, it led to starvation. In the trans case, you get healthy bodies destroyed and people unable to have either gay or straight relationships, often losing all sexual function along together with any fertility. The cishet female replies to that, not leftist really, except for in the most American sense of the word. It's more of a liberal thing. And the detrans male replies to that, I think first commenter is right. Queer and trans ideology have hijacked liberalism's desire to accept everyone. The Q/T activist ideology, I used to be one, or at least aspiring, hates liberal assimilations because they're not working to overthrow everything. Normativity and bring us towards collective liberation. That's leftism. Someone who's desisted comments, this was a good analysis, thank you. I think there's a lot of people mixing up liberal and leftist/Marxist views. There are sometimes, but absolutely not always the same. And the desisted female comments, this might be a context thing. I'm in Europe, and the left isn't necessarily woke or liberal here. That's separate, social liberalism. And not even those are woke in the same progressive way here. I'm in the Nordics, and even if some were upset that, for example, Norway stopped puberty blockers for girls, most people on the left agreed it was sensible. A detrans male comments on the original post, if politicizing us prevents others from making the same mistakes, then I'm okay with it. I think you just have to take a break from the internet sometimes. Now on to the next post, titled, My Story. This is by a detrans male. I was the kid who was misdiagnosed bipolar but was actually autism spectrum. I was placed on lithium and shut down. All of my exceptional scores from my youth went down, and I compartmentalized my existence. I'd learned about sexual reassignment surgery when I was about 13. This is back in 1996. I also learned about the book The Boy Who Was Raised a Girl, talking about John Money and Bruce Reimer about around that time. I was fixated on that. I was married first when I was 18. We had a kid. The marriage wasn't working out. I was running my own recording studio and met a woman who I ended up marrying years later. She ended up going to be a nurse. I started school to be an x-ray tech and started having back problems. Around '07, doctors realized I had a degenerative disc disease and herniated disc scoliosis, and I was doing freelance audio engineering for a while. My second wife had a son who I was helping to raise. Custody with my own son was getting difficult with my first wife. Eventually, I started to seek out stronger pain control methods for my spinal issues, and eventually I realized that a friend of mine from Guitar Center was transitioning with medications they were getting from Germany where they lived. I couldn't stop thinking about it for a year and started putting together all these things about my childhood, wondering if it was a great reason why I was in a different from everybody. The American Psychological Association had just come out with the DSM-5, which turned transsexualism into gender identity disorder, but then made a leap with some low-quality studies, link in the description, to affirm this new term dysphoria. And since I was employed as an x-ray tech and medical assistant, I was watching them basically telling the world that this was no longer a disorder, but that any feeling like this is normal and that this was a viable treatment for it. I came out to my wife at the time that I was bisexual, and she, coming from a homophobic background, couldn't cope with it at all, and for like a year we went back and forth in the relationship, trying to make some kind of arrangement work. But eventually I left. I was living on my own. My son, who was 2 or 3 hours away, my second marriage was dissolved. My stepson was sort of caught in the middle of it, and I was suicidal. I figured if I didn't have anything to live for, I might as well try this thing. At the time, I was studying for the MCAT, shifting my major to pre-med, and I even applied to medical school. Around this time, my tremors were getting worse, and my neck and back pain were becoming untenable. I was taking a lot of medication to try and keep making money. I moved into a studio apartment so I could work on my makeup and dress and mannerisms in private. And when I did finally go to the LGBT center of Hollywood, I'd lost 50 or 60 pounds I isolated for a year. Because I had developed an eating disorder and trying to make my body thin so estrogen would affect me better. Further reiterating how this was all obsession and dysmorphia, finding myself compelled to do something about it. I started my hormones after a 10-minute intake with a therapist who wanted to discuss my transitioning goals and show me a video in 2014 when I was 30 years old. Any discussion about a long-term therapist or psychotherapist was optional, and I could make a phone call if I wanted to, but it wasn't required. After 5 or 6 months on hormones, I began to get some different pronouns in public and decided to go full-time female, much to the chagrin of my employer and my family. But my mom and my grandfather both died of stage 4 cancer as I was breaking up with my second wife and when I was just about to get hormones. My son had found out from some pictures online and a friend who said, "I think your dad's trans." So I met with him at my grandmother's house at my grandfather's funeral so we could hang out and talk about it. The LGBT center only asked about my bipolar in a passing way, treating it as separate from these other feelings that they called dysphoria. I eventually changed my legal name and gender after doing 6 months or so of hormones around 2015 and met my third wife online. In 2017, I'm 34 at the time, the LGBT Center finally was able to contract Dr. Alexander Sinclair, Beverly Hills, as well as an electrolysis center in Beverly Hills to do the breast augmentation, as well as start clearing the groin hair with electrolysis in preparation for sexual reassignment surgery. I did 50 hours in the groin. I actually had 3 surgical consultations via email or in person regarding SRS, but different surgeons. But as somebody who wanted to be in the medical field, I just never felt like it was actually a vagina when they described it, or when I would look up these surgeries to watch them, or when I would look in the books to see how they were directing the surgeons to make the incisions. It seemed more like food medicine. And I thought to myself, even if there's stem cells in an implanted uterus, is that really going to make me feel like a woman? Is it really going to make me happy? I also had a couple spinal surgeries, one on my L5S1 and an ACDF of C34 around 2016. Both surgeries which didn't actually take care of all these problems I was having. Eventually, I saw a neurologist at the Movement Disorder Clinic at Cedars-Sinai in Beverly Hills and was diagnosed via CAT scan young onset Parkinson's disease. I had also been carrying with me degenerative disc disease, and the rigidity from Parkinson's was making the degenerative disc disease harder to manage. I had tremors. I was having swallowing problems, among a slew of other symptoms with my gait and balance. My wife was having feelings of dysphoria with her sex because of past trauma and abuse, and the loss of a baby due to domestic violence at 12 weeks when her abusive ex folded her in half and raped her until the baby died. It was never reported, and she went to multiple clinics trying to get them to remove the dead fetus, but none of them would, saying she would pass it naturally. She was never able to dilate, so she started to get septic, and her mom had to pay for a private doctor. Between that and getting bullied at school when she was young because everyone thought she was a boy because of rumors, she decided to try testosterone as well for 6 months, and of course I was going to affirm it because that's the authority. And the LGBT Center was more than fine to overlook all of her trauma and history to just jump for this possible feeling in the wrong body. After 6 months, her voice started to change. Her beautiful singing voice was gone. She started noticing the hair on her face and the balding. She decided to stop. In 2018, we became homeless after noticing the toxic situation my wife was raising in, and we decided to move to Oregon and living in our van. We settled in Portland for a bit, where I was reconnected with a friend who I knew back just before I met my wife in 2015. This friend I knew in Oregon had an orchiectomy through the LGBT Center of Hollywood and was fast tracked on hormones, and within 5 years deleted all their social media and killed themselves. We had some bad roommates while we were in Oregon and ended up on the Oregon coast trying to start fresh. I was in the middle of my SSI case for my disabilities, and since I'd been in the medical field, I had 300 pages to back up my claim. But since we had just moved, we lost our health insurance, so I was not able to get more documentation or see any more doctors. Eventually, my case failed in 2021. I tried to work a little bit part time because we had no other help when we lived in Cannon Beach. And when COVID hit, my wife's ex started to withhold visitation from her two kids and wouldn't let them come out for summer. My son was starting to get into some trouble at his house with his mom, my first wife, so we moved onto her land, living in a truck camper trailer, trying to have a farm so we could be closer to my wife's two kids. I could maybe repair some of the bad behaviors with my son. My ex was still narcissistic and was starting to become hostile towards us, not letting us throw away our garbage, turning off our power. So we bought the trailer from her, thinking it would help, and then she kicked us off the land. But the trailer wasn't on a truck, so we couldn't move it, so we had to sell it and move to Las Vegas, sacrificing all the visitation we'd fought for since we arrived at a house in Lake Los Angeles. It was during this time that I had no hormones. My teeth were beginning to break. I was trying to move bricks around to protect my farm from the goats my ex had put there to destroy all of our things, hurting my back again, with no health insurance, and once the garden was destroyed, we left. In Las Vegas, we started working Uber Eats. I was just living on as some almost non-binary person because I felt like my transition had failed. I started feeling really strange walking out of the house with these breast implants on me, not being able to take care of the hair on my face, having no way to even attempt at passing. And I started to withdraw some more. Eventually, SSA sent me to get my psych evaluated because they had no information about my bipolar, which hadn't been treated since I was 18, and they wanted to know what that was all about. The doctor, after going through my entire medical history and testing me, determined that it was autism spectrum, not bipolar, according to the signs and symptoms, the tests, and my presentation. My wife Grace has a son who's also autism spectrum. We suspect that my wife is as well. Once that diagnosis happened when I was 38, I stopped holding myself to some normal standard and started thinking about my entire history in a different light. I was already with somebody who loved me and accepted me, and sexually everything was good with us no matter what, so I started to let go needing to get hormones again or focusing on surgeries. Once people wanted to redefine the word woman to include trans, and once Leah Thomas started to take over women's swimming as if that was appropriate whatsoever, and when J.K. Rowling started getting cancelled for just standing up for abused women like my wife, who have endured a ton of abuse and malice from men, it struck me that none of this was what I signed up for. The dream of becoming a woman wasn't a real actuality. The medical field is promising something that is just a dream. Biological sex is a reality, and evolution designed us to get used to our puberty and grow through it, not to sidestep it and make our own plans. I started to think of dysphoria more of as dysmorphia, and started to see dysmorphias like eating disorders and body identity integrity disorder as a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. Both dysmorphia and OCD are, according to Medscape, treated with medication for stress management and cognitive behavioral therapy to help curb fixating triggers. Dysphoria was never treated that way. I also started to really notice how the surgeon I went to was posting all kinds of pictures on his Instagram of all these surgeries in a blasé manner. He would go out to trans clubs to have women pose with him with their hand on his neck pretending to choke him out. I started realizing how none of these cosmetic surgeons since the 2000s have been focusing on reconstruction. They've only been focusing on cosmetics and beauty and youthfulness. And you end up seeing human Ken doll, human Barbie people addicted to surgery. And we know these people have mental conditions, but none of these surgeons are therapists, and it's not their job to screen people via psychotherapy to help them come to a logical growth or to make peace with their past trauma or origin of their fetish or whatever. Now I speak out against this because I never during my 6 years of transition thought that children should have access to this. I never thought that people would take women's spaces away and violate them so perniciously and flaunt fetishes in front of children so unapologetically. And now there's all these signs of pedophiles and exhibitionists trying to hijack some of this culture for their own nefarious ends. I feel like there's a lot more to be said, but this is a cliff notes. Thank you so much for listening. Now, that was a heavy one. Now, next post, titled Getting Over Shame. This is by a detrans female. Hi everyone, does anyone ever feel shame over being a detransitioner? I know logically there's nothing to be ashamed of really, but sometimes my insecurities overtake me and I feel embarrassed over my look and my voice. I have this feeling that I look too male or that I sound like a boy, despite everyone around me telling me otherwise on both, and struggle with the idea that anyone would ever love a woman like me. In reality, I know these are just self-limiting beliefs, but I have a hard time getting past the shame feeling. Does anyone have any insight to this? I'm newly detransitioned. Now from the comments, a detrans female comments, this is not uncommon. It's okay to feel that way. Truthfully, there's nothing wrong with you, and it sounds like you know that. What I learned from my detransition is that I had a lot of wounds involving my own self-rejection that detransitioning and transitioning brought up. A lot of those had to do with things I'd learned from other people about what defines a beautiful woman or a handsome man, and I felt that I didn't fit the criteria for a beautiful woman. But what makes a woman beautiful is up to each person's opinion. So who's to say that someone is or isn't beautiful? The truth is your opinion of yourself is the only one that matters. Tell yourself you're beautiful and others will see your beauty. This self-confidence radiates through us and makes us so much more attractive to others. But you've got to see it for yourself first. You're beautiful. You're just working on seeing that beauty. Now, the cishet female comments, part of getting over shame and being free of it is realizing that first, it's actually okay to feel ashamed. Being consumed by shameful thoughts and defining your self-worth is a road to hell. But you're not dealing with detransition wrong or badly just because you're not feeling positive and at peace with yourself all the time. It's okay that you feel how you feel. It's okay to be afraid of the future and to be kicking yourself and have pessimistic thoughts. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, though, if you don't cling on to those thoughts for identity. If it helps, and this is a pretty macabre thought exercise, but it works for my angsty mind, remember that all people are embarrassed and regretful and self-hating of things all the time for all sorts of reasons. Some for much heavier ones than detransition, though physical changes to the body will affect the mind greatly. Some people's last words to deceased loved ones were cruel. Some people disable themselves or others by irresponsible driving. There are terrible, horrific things out there to live with that would make being a regretfully masculinized woman, while still very difficult, be a comparative relief. In the moments of hopelessness, imagine being in a much worse situation, and then suddenly find yourself teleported into your shoes now. You could have always messed up worse, and you'll find ways to do things well again, and like yourself for it. Now today's last post, titled, Trigger Warning, Sexual Assault. I'm so damn angry, and I'm not taking S from anyone anymore. This is by a detrans female. I was harassed on my way back home Friday night. I was totally blank and I froze. I was confused. For a while I felt that I was small again, and I stood there lost on the sidewalk. Lost on the sidewalk I take to walk home every day. I didn't want to tell my parents, and I didn't want to be alone in my room, so I called a classmate and we hanged out for the rest of the night. I didn't talk about what happened. I think I was in shock or something because while we were walking and joking, the scene of what happened repeated in my head all night and I felt so damn confused. While walking with him that night, it made me so sad and angry that walking with a man seems to be the only way to prevent this situation. I was sad, but when I came back to reality, that turned into a very uncomfortable sensation and an anger I haven't been able to let out. I've been thinking of how bad I want to punch that asshole in the face until he effing bleeds. Just 2 nights before what happened, my mom asked me if it was safe for me to come back home alone at that hour, and I told her I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not how I was a time ago. Even at the beginning of my 20s, I used to feel like when I was younger, weak. Some months ago, I found I have a strong personality and truly strong. I'm not strong like a man. I'm strong in attitude and in my way of dealing with stuff, which doesn't prevent stuff from happening, but prevents me from falling down. I didn't think for a second I wish I was a guy. I also didn't feel like wearing safer clothes. Yesterday, I went out with my best friend, a girl, and while we were walking, a man told us some S and I insulted him badly. He laughed because he had never seen such a reaction and said that's how men are, in a way to calm me down. I know a lot of men will always do that. When getting catcalled, I just try to ignore them. But my violent reaction made me feel so strong and brought me so much confidence. I want to be violent more often. Honestly, I'm very nervous of going out tomorrow. I'm angry, I feel feeling like crying. I've been feeling my heart suddenly racing, nausea, and I just feel violent. I want to punch someone in the face. My reaction that night was disappointing. I didn't defend myself, but I don't blame me. I'm just mad. So, now from the comments. A desisted female comments, I think self defense training would do a lot of good. The potential for violence is healthy. You just need to channel it properly, and martial arts of some kind can show you how to do this. Also, don't blame yourself. You really can't control your reaction with no training. The brain picks fight, flight, or freeze, or befriend. However, some training will teach you how to use force and what's the appropriate time, place, and amount to use it. And the original poster replies, I can't fight a man and win. Now, a desisted male comments on the original post, buy a gun. Or if you can't do that, at least get something to protect yourself with. Preferably something that gets the message across that you're not to be messed with without you having to actually use it. And the original poster to that replies, thanks. That'll be all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support these, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much again for watching these videos, and have a good day.